Here we go for Bitcoin. We have a big event today with the CPI data coming out a little bit later, I believe around market open, but don't quote me on that one. And that likely does set the stage for a bit of a range and probably resolution. In this case, I do think that the market's a little bit more likely to bounce for the reasons that we've been postulating over the past 24 hours. Still yet to come to fruition, but today would be the day that you'd be looking, or I'd be looking for something like that to play out if it is indeed going to play out. Now, obviously, in this case, we are seeing extremes on pretty much all timeframes for Bitcoin, but on BBWP, measuring the volatility, the dispersion of returns, of course, right here. And we are starting to see even the 12-hour move ever so closer towards the moving average on that. So once we do see the BBWP get below there, I would be looking for at minimum a sideways range plus probably a corrective bounce. Again, corrective bounce within the context of current trend does imply, long-term continuation, but Bitcoin, being a very volatile asset can play out some pretty, some pretty impressive bounces if it wants to. But this is consistent amongst all lower term timeframes right here. 12-hour, 6-hour is double extremes, which is usually a good sign for me to be looking for bounces. 4-hour is already there. And then even the daily, I think, is, the highest level that it's been since... Wow, the highest level that it's been since May of last year, in fact. So, of course, this can obviously stay up here for a little bit of time, but ultimately, I would be looking for Bitcoin to put in a bit of a base as it does come off of a round psychological even number, that $30,000 region that I think a lot of people are looking at. And typically, when you get something like that, it's very likely to bounce at these regions, but long term, perhaps weeks down the road, quite likely to roll over as well as people kind of puke out these sort of regions right here. But in that case, also in alignment with likely a bounce probably in this next 24-hour session, we do see extremes on volume, not just volatility, and we expect extremes on, nice pivots on the market. So in this case, I do want to now bring out the next piece of which I'm going to go over here for CME. I'm going to go down to a 4-hour time frame. And what do we have? We have a bit of a short-term range and resolution in order here. So let me go down actually to an hour in this case. The top side of the short-term range is going to be basically the high of, was this yesterday? Yeah, this was yesterday. Basically at around 32,600 or so. Any sort of an hourly closure above there, I would initiate, or I would call an extension of the bounce to very likely somewhere around this blue box target over here. Doesn't necessarily need to happen all in the same day, but perhaps throughout the rest of the week, something like that. I suspect that that's probably what we're looking at around the time that CPI data drops later today. And to the downside, if this were to happen, I would immediately get, bearish for continuation down somewhere around about 28,000 to 28,500 or so. And that would be even with an hourly closure below yesterday's low, it's actually today's low, at least for myself, being that I am in the Eastern European time zone here. And that would be below about 30,100. That's 30,100. Anywhere below there, I do look for one more continuation drive to the downside. Very likely targets initiated towards about 38,500. Which I'll explain in just a moment, or I guess I could just do it right now. It's based off of the 5-day 200 simple right here, of which I would be looking for bounce off that region in this case. Also, same sort of wick lows that we do see on the macro scale coming in from this macro range that Bitcoin's been in for about a year and a half now. Anyways, on top of that, what also does suggest likely corrective bounce in the midst here is over here on the daily. We did fulfill the criteria needed to cross the daily stochastic momentum back onto the upside for CME. Now, in order to remain to the upside, 33,100 would need to be closed above today. And on spot price action, it's now starting to follow through as well. And by Wednesday, which we are on Wednesday right now, you can start to use spot, at least in my experience. I think that that's okay yet again. And we will see it naturally cross the upside with any sort of a closure today above 31,350 or so. So especially if 31,350 is closed above today for the daily, I would be looking for that bounce to carry Bitcoin onwards and upwards, likely somewhere short term to about 33 to 33.5, and then potentially all the way back up to the gap fill that we do see on CME coming in back from last Friday's closure to this Monday's open, which is also in alignment if we take a fib from the overall range that Bitcoin's been in for basically this whole year, right around the 382 Fibonacci retracement. And that's a pocket between about 34,500 on the bottom to as much as about 35,500 to the top right there. I would be looking for pullbacks from that region. And to be fair, this is a bearish retracement, being that Bitcoin is in a downtrend, obviously. And you do kind of expect your lower high somewhere around the 382 on a strong trending movement. We also see the 9 exponential on the daily coming in that region as well. and all lower term timeframes are starting to flip back around here for momentum to the upside from a stochastic momentum perspective. We can see 12-hour over here cross the upside. It will remain with upside momentum as long as Bitcoin's above 30,450. Again, we see this is very likely a corrective signal. So I'm not calling a reversal here, just potential bounce, especially if Bitcoin does clear above yesterday's high. And I imagine that probably happens sometime around CPI data release later today. In this case, 6-hour is also going to be showing upside momentum as long as Bitcoin is above basically 30,000 bucks or 29,850 or so. 4-hour is going to be showing also upside momentum as long as Bitcoin's above 31,200, which is currently 400 bucks above right now. And hourly is also going to be up actually as long as Bitcoin's above 30,800. So I do suspect that Bitcoin's a little bit more likely to bounce today than not. And if Bitcoin does clear above essentially yesterday's high, especially on an hourly closure, I would extend targets again short term to about 33.5 to 34, and then probably a bit of a range, and then likely another leg up testing somewhere around here. At that point, I would want to come back tomorrow and see where things are at. I would neither call continuation or reversal exactly from that moment, but I do want to once again I do want to once again express my concerns long term that Bitcoin probably does have more downside, or at least statistically speaking, it's relevant to suggest that downside is still quite likely here. Anyways, let me just pull this up as far as this goes, because I did forget one major thing over here, the global open interest. So this is something that I've been speaking about a lot. I even got some shit for this too, which is, well, fair enough. People are, of course, entitled to their opinions, right? But in this case, I was saying that anytime that we have seen global open interest above about 14 billion or even around 14 billion plus a local high confirmed, that has initiated pretty much all of the open interest flushes throughout the last couple of years here. And we are now back down around the flushing area, if you will, which is about 10 billion even. And you can see that that's essentially where Bitcoin did put in some pretty major lows earlier this year in February, March, and January as well. Now, again, all of these were just corrective bounces before long-term continuation, but I would expect that, it kind of aligns with a bit of a bounce here. And these bear market bounces, they can be really, 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 really nasty. Anyone who's actually traded like a full-on bear market, that these bear market bounces, they are just, it's really, really difficult, honestly. At least for me, it is quite difficult, because the whole psychology of them is to make you bullish yet again. And realistically, where does Bitcoin actually flip around, do the old flipperoonie, and become, I guess, bullish, if you will? Well, I would say on the macro scale, certainly not until we see above about $52,000. Until then, everything is basically down as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, we can obviously call upside moves in between there, and I'm sure that there's going to be some pretty aggressive ones. I mean, even from here to like 34,000 bucks is, that's a 10% move, to put it into context. But ultimately, I would express caution long-term here for Bitcoin still. And one of the big things for me is, of course, this chart right here, and we'll probably end on this one, and that is going to be the 5-day volatility versus momentum chart. It's for the people who've been looking at the daily one, that one already played out, and because it also played out, we kind of do expect a bounce after targets like that have been hit. This one is still, however, active though. There's actually a really good question in Discord yesterday. Someone was asking me if I thought that this expansion phase off of BBWP would play within the trend line of this, of the last couple of years here, or the last year and a half. Look, I just put in this trend line for reference. I don't think that trend lines on volatility indicators actually work in this case, but if you are looking at it, yes, it is breaking, and this does suggest that we are going to see, a macro shift. If you kind of interpret it in that way. For myself, I would not go that far, but not even going that far is still nasty enough in this case, as anytime that we have seen the 5-day BBWP in the teens or lower, especially, the expansion phase from that has led to an average move of about 45% up or down, because of course, volatility is direction neutral over the course of, on average, just over 40 days. We've seen our first stretch of expansion over here last week of April. So we are looking for this, or theoretically, historically speaking, we would be looking for this to play out towards those, averages by around the end of this month or early whatever the next month is, which I think is June. What are we, May, June, whatever the fuck, doesn't matter. Or I guess it does matter, but basically end of this month, early whatever the month after this one is. And in this case, we have seen that 5 days stochastic momentum has been, incredibly accurate, especially in the past couple of years here. And we can even backtest it further than that with getting the general direction of that expansion on volatility. So we've already obviously seen like the first 25 to 30% move of this. And in this case, we have seen it, well, to the downside. So in this case, we don't only see that 5-day BBWP, 5-day stochastic momentum is actually getting back into the bearish control zone after rejecting, the bullish control zone over here. That's kind of where the hopium last aligned, and also rejection of this regression trend line right here as well. But also, we can forecast the new price that would be needed in order to force this one back to the upside, be seen as we just got another close last night. So this number is significantly different now, and it is 38,750. So if Bitcoins could start to close back above that region, that's where it starts to say, hey, there might be some long-term hopium here. But until then, pressure remains to the downside, and 45% from that expansion phase right here, would suggest Bitcoin somewhere down around about $24,000 to $25,000. That, of course, is also in alignment with, actually, let me, whoopsies, I done goofed over there. That, of course, obviously is in alignment with one of the CME gaps from about a year and a half ago, back down around here. And also in alignment with several other things as well. One of the big ones for me, actually, is this that I brought up yesterday, I think it was. Let me just double check on it. Yeah, here it is. And that is deviations on the macro for Bitcoin, on its macro lows from the green moving average here. The green moving average is a 55 exponential. And basically, anytime that we have seen Bitcoin drop below it, it has led to, well, an average move of about 40 to 50% below that region, which is basically the low $20,000 territory over the course of the next basically month. Right here, the only one that doesn't necessarily work within that structure was, of course, the Rona dump. Now, again, you could argue that that was a bit of a black swan, so we don't expect it to work exactly in that way. But ultimately, we do expect that over time, this percentage drop down should be less and less as the asset matures. Naturally speaking, you expect less of, less like aggressive moves as the asset grows from hundreds of millions to billions to trillions. And in this case, I would kind of suggest maybe around 40% would be reasonable. Again, that kind of puts Bitcoin down around the mid to low $20,000 territory. Who knows where a stray wick is found, but ultimately, again, as long as this condition is present over here, which let me just bring it back up. Yeah, here we go. As long as this condition is present over... Oh, motherfucker, I just done goofed again. There we go. Apologies. I'm having autistic rages right now, but... as long as this condition is present, risk does remain to the downside from a statistical perspective, at least in my opinion. I think that that's more relevant. So again, Bitcoin can play out a nice bounce here, definitely. But bounce is not the same thing as reversal. And again, it can bounce, can bounce several $1,000s to the upside. I wouldn't even consider, I would not consider reversal at all whatsoever is even likely until at minimum that 5-day stochastic momentum is back to the upside. Until then, I'm sure that we're starting to build up some divergences over here. Yeah, we got a little bit of phantom div formulating on the 4-hour for CME. So probably a little bit of short-term range and probably test the upside around CPI data later today. I would still, however, look at this as in a range resolution perspective. So hey, below 30,100, I would immediately get bearish for one more swipe to the downside, probably a little bit lower than we're currently at, somewhere around about 28,000, even to 28,500. Anyways, hopefully that was helpful. And there you go for Bitcoin, sirs and zers.